it's minimised some of those risks.
Right, you should be able to overload as well, because it will work like a word file and whatever, that makes two separate files.
Also in here?
No, it's not local. It's a policy.
Oh yeah, okay.
So it's just big escape.
Yeah.
Let's just remove
Yeah, that's one way to follow this.
So Paul said he has.
Well, I have, but you'll have to come in June to hear about it. No, I'm joking. There's actually, so the 1330s and 1340s, Joan is constantly in court. There's obviously the famous case where she's regularly trying to petition for her husband's husband's body back. Doesn't succeed, but she's regularly pleaded over, particularly her liberty of trim. That goes all the way to 1347, and she finally gives up the ghost and gives it to Roger Jr., the second earl of March. But there's lots of other cases. Now, I'm toying in my mind whether her and Elizabeth Battlesmere, who's her granddaughter, daughter-in-law, whether they are actually coming to blows in the 1330s, or whether they're colluding to ensure the inheritance remains, relatively speaking, consolidated. Because obviously Elizabeth Mortimer, takes as her second husband William de Boon, Earl of Northampton. And then obviously she goes on, takes a different fork in the Mortimer path, but she's still obviously a Mortimer widow. So there are lots of cases. And Joan is one of the most attractive characters in the whole Mortimer story. You know, she's so long lived and so able, and she comes across in the sources in a way that I haven't allowed her to come across this afternoon. Apologies for that. Sorry.
I would say French, she was probably able to speak French as well, I would have said. And so that's likely to have been the language they communicated in. Certainly they write to the king, or they do a lot of correspondence in French, mostly, and not Latin, not English. Cultural differences, I'm not sure. I wouldn't... By this stage, fewer than there would have been, say, in the previous century, I would have said. There's much more intermingling, they're much more familiar with each other, the English and the Welsh. There's been a long history of connections, intermarriage, association. So I'd say cultural difference was probably not insurmountable.
I was really surprised to find the name Peter John, and maybe somebody here knows why two Christian names would go together at that time, because it's not usual in the Middle Ages to have two Christian names conjoined like that. In fact, it's not usual until late 16th century. So that in itself is odd. What I commented on earlier about always the eldest son is named after his paternal grandfather. Now if you look around naming systems in Ireland, in Scotland, there are conventions whereby the eldest son is named after the father's father, the second son is named after the maternal grandfather, the third son is named after the father, etc. There's all sorts of rules. I think the most common one is a Scottish one, where the father gives his name to his second son. Now there may well have been added rules to the Mortimer Convention, I don't know, in which case that Hugh might be shuffled up one perhaps. You don't know which sons have died along the way. And since I'm meant to be writing a completely different book at the moment, I wasn't going to spend any more time trying to work it out than just the eldest sons. So those younger sons could well be in different orders, apart from the ones in bold who are heirs. I ought to add that anybody who wants to know, why has he done that when it's not that way in traditional lineage? Go on the website and look at the outline lineage there. It's fully footnoted. There are about 500 footnotes supporting it all. 99 pages long, that lineage, so you'll find all the reasoning that I know about the order of people there.
I think it's about identity. It's about family identity and who you are. You know, I mean, I don't know if any of you have read or watched Game of Thrones, but there's the idea that there's always a Stark in Winterfell, that there's always a Roger Mortimer, or always a Tudor Mortimer, always a Humphrey de Bohun. You know, I think that name is powerful, and yes, it's confusing to us, but of course all those letters, which you look at the Chancery rolls and you can't work out which Mortimer it is or which Bohun it is. Well, the people at the time would have known, because that letter, of course, is carried by someone to somebody else, and they say, well, I want you to go to Attleborough, or I want you to go to Wigmore, and it's that Mortimer that I want. So I don't think it's anywhere nearly as confusing for them as it is for us, and I suspect that they would have had nicknames, you know, that they would have called each other that actually allowed for, you know, confusion within the family. You often will find where an elder son has died, that actually a son born later on is given the same name. So I think that there are just family names that carry on. I think it's about family identity and connection to the land.
To get an early 14th century amount or a modern amount is to multiply by 2,000. Obviously that's just a very rough and ready kind of reckoning. So if we work out that, say, a labourer probably earned about 1.5 or 2 pence a day, and there were 240 pence in the pound, so a labourer or a normal English worker at the time might earn something, let's say, in the region of 2 or 3 pounds a year. So if we kind of put that in perspective, that Hugh Despenser had an income of £7,000 a year. So the richest man in England in the early 14th century was Thomas Earl of Lancaster, with an income of 11,000 a year. If that helps to put it into perspective a bit more.
Can I add to that? There's a little bit in the end of somewhere in Time Traveller's Medieval where I talk about the difficulty of exactly this problem. If you use labour as a form of comparison, then you can find multiple thousands of times you have to increase the price. If you use chickens, you get a totally different number, and if you use something like saffron, which is still picked by hand, is closest to being the original thing, you get very different figures again. So when we're talking about money across this age, it has different meaning, because so many lords actually have income and wherewithal and wealth, which isn't actually financial, it's paid in kind and things like that. So it's a bit misleading when we start to try and put numbers on it, and all those calculators the National Archives and the Bank of England give you, they're very misleading. So,
Danny, sorry, I was about to say, if you want a completely reliable, not at all bogus guide,
rubbish!
the National Archives has a currency converter on its website. We use it every day.
Yes, that has been pointed out to me. It should have been the 31st of October. I did have a word with Ian Mortimer over lunch.
Apparently it's my fault.
Well, it's Ian's publisher's fault. As I was preparing the slides, I just quickly checked the index to the greatest traitor to make sure I had the right date. And in the index to the greatest traitor, it is listed as the 31st of November. Over lunch, I also looked at the text, and it is correct as October in the text. But it's a typing error in the index, which I then just copied onto the slide. My apologies.
I'm stepping back on this one.
No idea. Never thought.
I've always been a royalist. I think Montfort has a lot of he has a silver tongue. He is charismatic. He's a man that attracts great loyalty as well as great hatred. You know, he's very much a Marmite person. And it's interesting to compare him with Thomas of Lancaster in Edward II's reign. Both of them, against royal authority, both end up dying. But Montfort's supporters stay with him and die with him at Evesham, Hugh Despenser being the most, whereas Thomas of Lancaster's desert him, and he's eventually sort of captured, almost sort of humiliating him. But having said all of that in favour of Simon, he is grasping and he is self-interested and he only ever sees his own point of view and he is almost unbearably stuck up. I think. So I'm very much a Montfort. Well, I mean, he does an interesting sort of transmorph from being a foreigner, being regarded as a foreigner. And Matthew Paris, the most famous 13th century chronicler, is vicious about all foreigners, but is vicious about Montfort at the start. But by the late 1250s, Simon de Montfort is about the only person that Matthew Paris still likes, which is quite interesting.
Okay. Also, I think something I often comment on when people want to compare the Middle Ages as a time of change. You know, 1066, one man knocks another off the throne and becomes king. 1485, the same thing happens. What's changed along the way? Well, in 1066, very few people could hold the king to account. By 1485, the king's firmly held to account by Parliament. And you've got to give Montfort a credit. It's the first commoners elected to participate in the government. Where would we be if we hadn't got Parliament? And where would Europe be? Because it took such a lead in Europe. So Magna Carta and de Montfort, I think, even though I don't like de Montfort at all, I give him the credit. He's a martyr.
I don't have a comment, but just to add, there's a brand new biography on Simon de Montfort about to come out at the end of May by Sophie Amber. It's called The Song of Simon de Montfort. It'll be great, so I mean, make sure you look out for it.
Okay. Dr. William Mortimer, Catherine Warner, Dr. Ella Cabana, John Driver, Dr. Andrew Spencer, and Philip Hughes. Thank you very much for coming today. Thank you.